Hey friends, Kim from Stamping Imperfection. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm here for day 13 of Inktoberfest 2021, and I'm going to share a whole bunch of different smooshing techniques with you for color hive inks. So to start with, I have two really quick and simple techniques, and the first one is just direct to paper ink smooshing. Just take your ink pad, smush it right on your paper. With the color hive inks, you get these beautiful hexagons, so they work beautifully for this technique. You want to put that aside to let it dry because the inks do lighten up a little as they dry, and then you can stamp right over the top of it. It's beautiful. Another quick and easy technique is clear block smooshing, and you just smush your clear block into the ink pad, stamp it down onto your paper. I always spritz with water when I do this because I love the watercolor effect that you get, the variegated color. I think it's really beautiful. And if you put several colors together with your ink block, it looks gorgeous. So it's a very pretty technique. So those are two very nice controlled ways to do ink smooshing. Let's take a look at what I consider to be the more fun, more traditional way of ink smooshing. You will need a piece of plastic. You can use the cellophane wrapping from a stamp or die set, or you can use a window sheet acetate piece. And I quite like this acetate because it's kind of thick. I can bend it. It's flexible. You'll need a mister with some water in it. I'm using the Mr. Perfect from Maker Forte. I have that filled with water, and you definitely want water for this technique. So I'm going to just play on some white cardstock, and you can decide which things you want to put on your tags here. So I'm just doing one color. I smushed Coronation Purple down onto the acetate, spritzed it with water a couple times, and you can see I'm kind of dragging the acetate, smushing it with my fingers, moving it around. I love this because you get a nice variegation of color around your page. I think it's really pretty. Now you'll see me pull this sheet of paper. This is just a piece of white cardstock. I use that to clean up my craft mat and my acetate between the things I'm making, so my ink doesn't go to waste. Now you don't have to do just one color here. I'm using the red Leicester orange, the telephone box red, and the Grand Canyon brown. I'll use my aqua pen just to mix them all up together, and then you flip that over and smoosh it onto your paper. You can see how I spread it around with my fingers. I dab places, like I'll take some of the excess sometimes and dab if there's a lot of white space. I also use a cloth or a paper towel to dab up the stuff that pools around the edges. Although sometimes that leaves really pretty marks. I feel like it needs a little yellow, so I'm going to add some English mustard and just get a little yellow in there to brighten it up. And I like the way that looks. I'm going to let that dry, and that'll make a very pretty card front. I'm going to stamp something on top of that. I'll pick a big stamp or a big sentiment and put that right on top of that. So for one of the tags, I'm doing just a layering, because I think the beauty of ink smooshing comes from layering colors. So I have some red Leicester that I smooshed on there, and now I'm adding some Hyde Park, and I just went right onto the wet ink. So I'm putting these two colors together because I know they play nicely together, and I'm cleaning up the excess ink again with that paper, which is getting a lot more ink layers on it. So I like it, cleaning off my acetate. And then I'm going to dry this because sometimes colors play well together, sometimes they don't. If you put two wet colors together, they will continue blending until they're dry. If you want to layer the ink so you see one ink color on top of another, then you want to make sure you dry the layers in between. So I'm adding some tartan teal because I love this color. I've been mixing it with everything lately. I just love it. And I just used the acetate and put that exactly where I wanted it, or about where I wanted it. It's not a perfect technique, but I think if you look at this and you feel like it's not done or you don't love it, add more layers. Just keep adding layers until you love it. I love to add splatter to my pieces, so I squished my Eclipse black ink onto my craft mat, spritzed it with water, picked it up with my aqua pen and tapped it over my finger. Now I'm adding some with acetate because that's how you get the big drips. And I always put that aside to let it dry, or I dry that with my heat tool. One of the keys for me is putting things aside to let them dry or getting them dried right away. And I love the way that looks. Now, anything that you can watercolor with, you can ink smoosh with. So a little bit of kaleidoscope powder, and I'm wishing I added a little bit more than that. I was being kind of stingy with it there. I spritzed it with water, and I will mix it with my aqua pen. I got this all over the place when I spritzed it. I don't know. I must have spritzed more air than water to start with, but that's okay. I can work with this. So I'm mixing it with water, and you can pick it up directly with your paper. This is another way to ink smoosh without the plastic. I find this not as controlled. Like, you have more control over where your color goes if you use the acetate, but this is a nice way to do it too. Now, I didn't have a ton of pigment in there, so I have some nice light orange around. I didn't have a lot of water there, so there's not a lot of color on that page yet, but what I have there is kind of splattered around, and I quite like that look. Now I'm going to take some of my Hyde Park re-inker. I'm going to spritz it generously. Here's a way to get really intense color. You can still see that orange below. That kaleidoscope powder is nice and bright, but you still get a hint of that orange below there. I'm going to dry it now because, again, I want to add another color on top. So I dry in between when I don't want the colors to blend. So I'm smooshing a little bit of that tartan teal down on the acetate, spritzing it with water, and I'm going to just place it now in some of the white spaces. Like, I'm aiming for the white spaces. And dragging it out. I could shake it over there, over the top of that piece, and get a little bit of drips and splatters added on there, which I always really like. And I often try to leave white space because leaving white space is not my forte, but I love the way it looks. It gives you a nice airy look. And if you want a darker, moodier piece, add some black now. Now, one of the things I like to do with these, I dried them all, and I like to actually stencil on top of them. And any technique that you do with stencils, whether you're adding paste or whatever, you can do on top of these splatters. I don't cover the whole thing. I just cover little bits of this. I'm using English mustard ink and the cascading dots. Those hexagon ones look amazing as well, but I feel like that just adds a little bit more dimension and texture. One tip I do have is I always pull out my laminator. I'm using a piece of copy paper. I fold it in half as a carrier sheet, and I just put one of my tags inside because they do warp, and I like to flatten them out and dry them at the same time. This works really well. You can also flatten them out with your die cutting machine. Now, here are some of the finished pieces. That's that white piece. I just cut it into 4 pieces, so I've got 4 card fronts all ready to go. And here are some of the tags that I made with the different techniques. And I love these. I would love it if you give this video a thumbs up, and if you stop over to my YouTube channel, and you will find me at Stamping Imperfection on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Thanks for watching, friends. Have a wonderful day.